I mean, it's like if you were to walk up on a surgeon, like removing a tumor, you'd be like, oh my God. Like if you had no reference for that, for like what a surgeon does, you'd be like, somebody stop this person. Like they're killing killing somebody, if you had no reference for that.
Welcome to part 3 of Foundations in Facilitation. So why don't we recap to get a higher dimensional view of the triangle of meaning we're tracing? We began with realizing that facilitators can locate on a continuum from clinical to shamanic approach, and can even expand in both directions as the practice progresses. Then we established the value of a facilitator having some sort of an ongoing personal practice with a mushroom, and the various perspectives which make that such a clearly good idea. So now today, should a facilitator eat mushrooms along with those for whom they are holding space? I won't cloud your reflection with mine, but I wonder if you've ever meditated on this while in the mushroom space. Whether you have or not, I hope you'll join me in the comments, where we'll continue the conversation. You are listening to Psilocybin Says. To support it, subscribe on YouTube and podcasts, and stay connected on Instagram and TikTok.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Psilocybin Says.
This is part 3 of our facilitator series. So we're talking about today to eat mushrooms with the people we're holding space for, or not to eat mushrooms with the people we're holding space for.
Controversial topic.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on this, Eric? What do you like to do?
I like to do what feels right. That's what I like to do. Sometimes I feel very much inclined to consume sacrament with those who I'm supporting, and sometimes I don't. So it's an intuitive process.
Yeah. Okay. So like most things in life, sounds like it's not black and white all the time, has to be the same. So tell us more about that. When do you feel like, you say it's an intuitive process for you. So when you're feeling intuitively like eating mushrooms with the person you're holding space for feels like it would be helpful, like how do you tell us more about that?
Okay, well, first let me just say that this is my practice. I am not proclaiming that this is how it should be done. There's a lot of different ways to think about this, and there are certainly some people out there for understandable reasons, because this is a misunderstood concept, who feel very strongly that a support person should never take the medicine alongside of the person they're supporting. I feel very strongly that that is an extremely myopic view, and it does not take into consideration so many factors about these sacred medicines that we're working with. So, when I am... Well, let me first go back to how I started to understand this as even a thing that you could do, right? So, like a lot of us, I started out taking mushrooms recreationally. First time I ever took mushrooms was New Year's Eve, 1999. No, that was not the first time I took mushrooms. It was like the third time I took mushrooms. But it was like my first time I took mushrooms was like a couple weeks before that. And 1999, bunch of friends hanging out in an apartment, eating mushrooms. Every single person ate mushrooms. We were just kind of good times. Like when you drink alcohol, everybody drinks alcohol and has a good time together. So we did that. We had a great time. Things go on. Years and years go by. Took mushrooms by myself sometimes. Would take mushrooms with friends again, and always it was just this recreational, let's have a good time. There was one instance, I recall, when I dosed with a friend, where I started to have some precognition. It was really interesting. It was like, we took off walking through the neighborhood at like 2:00 in the morning. We're walking across the street, and at this certain point, I just felt the air changed, and I grabbed his arm and I said, "Stop. It's 3:00. And as soon as I said that, a church bell in the neighborhood rang 3 times, and I was like, what the fuck? How did I know it was 3:00? Excuse me. And that wasn't really a huge monumental experience, but it was significant to me. I was like, how did I know that? And as time went on, and I started, would be dosing with people. It was never working with somebody then. It was just us taking mushrooms together. There came another instance where I was with a friend. I've shared this maybe on the podcast before, but We took a big dose of fresh mushrooms in a smoothie, just launched off into outer space together. This was a more intentional experience, but it was still, just kind of like, I'm not there to help you. We're just doing this together. And about, 45 minutes, an hour after it set in, I started getting this just incredible burning in my groin. And I was just like, what the fuck is going on? It was so painful. And as soon as I started to recognize that pain, this burning sensation, he stood up to go to the bathroom and he's peeing on a tree or whatever. And he's like, oh my God, I've got this UTI infection. It's burning so bad. And I was like, holy shit, I'm feeling what he's feeling. That night unfolded into some very, very high weirdness that I won't go into. But it certainly opened my eyes even more to the reality that when we're taking these medicines, not only do we have access to more information and this transpersonal information and experiences, but we actually, in some ways, are stepping into a different reality. We are stepping into somehow almost like partially in another dimension, or we become aware that we already exist in higher and multiple dimensions. And then I started to understand that with that awareness, I could actually work from that dimensional space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
hold on. So let me just because it's a really interesting evolution, and I really think it's important that people understand that this is not something that I just decided to do. Like, I just want to take mushrooms with people, because as we started getting into supporting people more intentionally, and most of that, like a lot of that was happening in the U.S., and most of the time I was dosing with people. And my intention in those early days was just to try to stay. There's a number of factors. One was to try to be more aware of whatever it was they were going through and be a more attentive support. And then there's like also this, how people can become paranoid and afraid on mushrooms. And if I like feed mushrooms to somebody and they go through paranoia thinking that they're poisoned or something, it's much easier to assure them that they're not poisoned if they see me eat the mushrooms too. And I used to joke back in the day, like, okay, you're going to take 3 grams and I'm going to take 6 grams, and you on 3 grams are going to be able to look at me and see that I'm okay. So you're going to know that you're okay. Right? It's like this kind of like, I know that person took more of this than me, and they're standing and capable of, being aware. So whatever I'm feeling on 3 grams or whatever this dose is, I'm okay. And then when we started doing the work in Jamaica, this is where this whole practice really started to evolve, and where I started to run up against some resistance. Understandably, again, people are reading Michael Pollan and they're hearing the Johns Hopkins, and they think this is just like some other medicine that you take and you feel better afterwards. And it was not all. It took some. I wouldn't say convincing. I never tried to convince anyone. If anyone ever didn't feel safe or comfortable with me taking mushrooms with them, then I wouldn't do it. But God, there's just so much here. What would very often happen is people would say, like we'd have plenty of facilitators, and there would always be multiple facilitators that didn't dose, and then I would dose with them. The first time, they wouldn't understand, like, well, I don't understand why you feel like you need to dose or why that would be of any benefit. And then I would, and usually after the very first dose, but if not that, then the second one for sure, the same people would be like, oh, I totally understand why you would do that. It is really valuable to have someone who is in charge, or who's, a person of responsibility that I can look to and know that we're on the same wavelength, right? It goes much, much farther than that. It goes, there's a lot of abilities that open up. There are levels of awareness that open up, and everything, all of this is just awareness as a tool. And so like, I tend to, the people who are the most, who have maybe the most trauma, or who have who I suspect are going to have the most challenging experiences, or who are going to need the most support, those are the ones that I usually really want to dose with. And typically I'm not like really engaged with that individual. It is more of a working from the inside. And again, like, this is really hard to try to put into, daily terms. But as I started to understand that taking mushrooms opened up abilities to be of greater assistance and greater service, that's when I started to really implement that. And my God, how much I have learned from all that. And I've seen other facilitators learn, and I've seen there has been much needed corroboration on phenomenon that has only been possible when being in the same space with the other folks. So I don't know if that makes any sense. It's kind of a big brain dump, and it's a whole lot. There's just so much underneath of that.
Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense to me. And also, in the spirit of playing devil's advocate, and some points that I want to bring to light that I think are very important. I'll say that given everything you just said, there's all these variables mixed in to that, some of which you mentioned, but like one of which would be having someone that is not in the mushroom space present can be, usually is important, if not very, just generally very helpful. And yes, that is a variable, and not always, like, if there's two very experienced people, like, it just depends on the circumstance. But like with sanctuary, that's 100% a best practice, is to have always someone there. If you're eating mushrooms, someone is eating mushrooms, there's a space holder. That's whether or not they're eating mushrooms or not, there's another person there, for all kinds of reasons, which I would like to go into a little bit more. But also, again, playing devil's advocate here and reflecting on some of my experiences with you, in particular, since you're talking about your experience as a space holder. You mentioned eating mushrooms and that giving comfort, which is so true in so many instances. And also, again, the variable there being that you are extremely experienced in that space. And so much so that in the midst of a very challenging experience, for you, even, most of the time, I think that you're going to come out of it, that you will get to the other side, or at least, even if you're doubting that, in a very high dose experience with another experienced person you're eating mushrooms with, you'll at least be able to convey that we're going to make this out. We're going to get out of this together. Even still, I will say that it can be disconcerting for someone who is a novice, very inexperienced in the mushroom space, to see someone very comfortable and experienced in that space on a higher dose, whose moving energy, we could say, term it that way, in an ecstatic way, or in a way that does not, that could feel very confusing and concerning. That's certainly an experience that I've had. Even now, I
think I scared you Saturday, didn't I?
You didn't scare me, but I definitely was wondering,
What the fuck is going on here?
how intently I needed to channel my light friends to help out. So yeah, just again, playing devil's advocate there on the point that it could be comforting to someone. It could also not be comforting.
Yeah.
So again, like, it's not black and white. Like, there's so many variables involved. And knowing as an experienced, if you're really experienced as a space holder, knowing who you're holding space for, what their attitude is, when it comes to life as we know it. Are they a person that is right now spiritually minded or not? Like, how far can you go in the space visibly in the material world? Like you mentioned, going within, I think, versus expressing more physically to be of service. So yeah, just like knowing our boundaries. To me, this illustrates like a conversation around knowing our boundaries and really knowing the person that we're holding space for.
Yeah, no, there's so many things to be mindful of here. There's so many conversations that need to be had before kind of, exercising in this way, especially for people who are just not familiar with it. But it's like a trip that I did years and years and years and years and years ago, where this kind of one of the earliest instances of this ongoing theme of light chasing away the darkness, right? And thinking in terms of our spiritual darkness, our physical darknesses, these illnesses and whatnot that we take on, the energy, and that there has been this kind of theme of the mushroom being light that we consume that then chases the dark out of all the corners, right? Sheds light on all the things that need light shed on. And in this trip years ago, there was this, I kept having this kind of visual of like the icky side of me, the icky side of humanity, always trying, like, hiding under a rock, trying not to be seen. And as the evolution of this trip moved on, where like I understood that there is no hiding, and it kind of like I kept saying over and over to the darkness that I am the rock. I am the rock. You go and hide under the rock to get away from me, but then I am the rock. You're hiding under me. And it's not really me. It's God. It's the light. It's consciousness. There is no hiding, right? And so this experience that we had the day, and I brought home a rock, it was interesting to me that the whole revelation there, because what was coming through in that experience was this same, I experienced it as a defender. I experienced it as a dragon kind of thing, but not a dragon of terror, a dragon that is defending the innocent, right? And so when that starts to come out, sometimes it sounds a little intimidating. I'm thinking of the one I did in Jamaica a while back, the private session I did a while back with our good friends from the UK, where that became, I did 15 grams with her. She did 20. She wanted me to do 15, and I did. And I turned into this bear dragon for several hours and vomited all over the New York Times magazine. And it was really profound and really interesting. And time was on the cover of this magazine, like a clock. And the whole theme was our eternity and this timelessness of, the continued balance between light and dark. Very, very powerful. They have worked with me a lot, and they were fucking loving it. They were like, I was just like growling on the ground, and they're like cheering me on and everything. The one the other day, you haven't been around me for a while in those states, excuse me. And the other individual we've known for quite some time, but she maybe is not as familiar with that. And so while what I was experiencing was significantly more subdued, because we were in a kind of a neighborhood, it was, I could see how it could be like immediately concerning. But it's like, as I think about this, think about any kind of high level technician. Like think about somebody that works on computer networks or something. Like you go in and watch them and you have no fucking idea what they're doing. It's like, it looks like they're destroying something half the time, like, and so like, just because someone doesn't understand what I'm doing doesn't mean that it's not still useful. Yeah. And so that's where a lot of times these preparatory conversations are really important to prepare somebody for the possibility of something like that coming up. Or the integration conversations. I've had a number of experiences where sounds, how far to go into this without sounding too much like a complete weirdo. But I had a number of experiences that were almost felt like exorcisms of sorts, Yeah. And afterwards, like the individuals who I was working with, like in the midst of it, they were fucking terrified. And they were begging me to help Eric. What is happening? And like, they didn't, we had, 7 other facilitators and they didn't want anybody but me. They trusted whatever. And so like, going through this whole process with them of whatever, turning into a dragon, bear, whatever. And then afterwards, the conversations being really important for helping them understand the context of what was happening. So, it's I really want people to understand that working with psychedelics and psilocybin in particular, this is not a one-time event, right? And we talk a lot about integration and all that stuff and having the conversations, but this is something that even if you never take mushrooms again, like it is, you have initiated a process that will continue to unfold for years and necessitates, warrants continued in-depth exploration and reflection and conversation. So just because we don't understand something or because something looks scary doesn't mean that it is.
Yeah. There's all kinds of metaphors that came up for me as you were sharing your metaphors. But with that minister that we know very well, we've known for years. Yes, she is still relatively inexperienced. She's inexperienced. She has experience, but she's still, she doesn't have
She's had like 10 mushroom trips.
She's had okay. And even still, she was concerned, like she kept saying things like she was wanting her dog to help you. And, she was thinking that you needed help. You mentioned that I had been around you in the space. For a while, I felt like if I would have been in the mushroom space, if I would have eaten more than 0.3 grams, then I would have way more quickly been able to help and assist in the process of communication with her, almost like a mediator of sorts, and just be more of assistance. But my job was to be the physical needs helper, really, at the time. But even still, all that being said, that minister, she still trusted the process. She knows you. She knows enough about, she's spoken with enough people that have had mystical experiences in the mushroom space, and she knows how experienced you are and how experienced I am. And she trusts us, and she trusts like the whole process enough for her. Like, yeah, she had moments of like, oh no, like go help Eric, like to her dog. And like, oh, is he okay? But not like, oh God, like I'm terrified. It wasn't like she was really concerned, really, really concerned. Just like that touch of like, I'm not sure what's going on there. Send him some love, thinking that it was, you were going through a hard time. But there were cues that I got that helped me know that what was going on with you was very good and like very helpful, like little things that you were saying and doing. So bringing it back to, like you just said, this isn't a one-time deal. This is an integrative thing. This is like where community, like with indigenous community practices, which is how the mushroom has really been used overall in time. It's like such a huge benefit of being within a community structure where the person that is there with you. They know you. You can keep talking about the stuff that doesn't make sense for hopefully at least months to come, if not years. To come.
Oh, there goes Eric turning into his bear dragon again. No big deal. Just let him do his thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's like if you were to walk up on a surgeon, like removing a tumor, you'd be like, oh my God. Like if you had no reference for that, for like what a surgeon does, you'd be like, somebody stop this person. Like they're killing killing somebody, if you had no reference for that. So it is, very,
and we have
see it similarly.
Not only is there very little individual reference, there's basically no cultural reference. We still think, particularly right now, psychedelics are, this relegated into the clinics and the therapists, and that it's a, some kind of concise, clean, efficient process. And it's not. It's fucking messy, it's sloppy. And I know that when I'm on mushrooms, I don't want, if you're not on mushrooms, just like stay over there, right? Because you're not going to get it, most likely, what I'm going through. Now, I think it is extremely important that we talk about the cautions here, the pitfalls here, because what is absolutely very possible, and I have seen this, and when I am training facilitators to work as a dosing facilitator, as a communing minister, then I always make sure that there is a surplus of non-dosing clerics or support people, because it is possible, especially when you're new to this practice of dosing with people, it is possible that you can get overwhelmed by your own personal, psychological, spiritual material, right? And one of the ways that I kind of try to explain this to people is that when you take mushrooms, it's like you are shining a magnifying glass or a microscope in on your own spirit and psyche, right? But you can take that magnifying glass and turn it around and direct it outside of you. It takes a lot of practice. It's very confusing in there. We all have a lot of our own stuff that we're working through. And so as you're gaining skill in this space, that's one of the most important, it is actually the most important thing that you can do, is continue to train your attention outside of your own self. Train your attention outside of your own self. Now, there eventually comes a time when you really understand and you know that it's all the same. The inside and the outside are the same. And so that's where, as time goes on, I have found anyway, that there is the ability for me to turn my attention inward and be a support in that way for other people. Now, that doesn't mean I'm paying attention to my own personal, psychological, spiritual stuff, but there does become a very interesting ability to kind of be with it all at the same time. That requires me knowing that there is at least one, depending on how many people are in the ceremony, but just like the other day, knowing that you are there to take care of any physical needs, then I can completely go inside and operate from that space. So yeah, it's still very hard to talk about.
Yeah. 'Cause I mean, just efficiency alone, like going back to the surgeon example, I don't know why keeps coming up, but like if you're a surgeon in a procedure, you want to make sure you've got some administrative people outside that operating room that can take care of people knocking on the door, and like, you know, you're deep and like you have prepared yourself and your hands are sterilized and like, you know, you're in that room like to do a job, and it requires like being in that space and staying in that space for optimum results to do your job well. So having somebody that like can just, if your neighbor's like, oh, your dog's out, or your, you know, your car's in my way, or who knows, whatever life stuff, that somebody can approach them in a way that will not concern them, and and also just keep you doing, you know, what you're there to do.
Yeah.
So you think this is what they're doing in research rooms right now?
Well, I know that they used to. There is precedent for therapists and clinicians to dose with the people they're supporting. That is all from the 40s and 50s and 60s, I believe. But yeah, there's definitely documented practice with medical professionals back in the day who were dosing alongside the people they were supporting in an effort to kind of facilitate connection and increase empathy. And like, gosh, there's so much that you could say about this, but the healing that people get out of going to a therapist, like, there's a lot of it that comes from just them, you know, releasing or sharing their life experience. But what we're seeing very obviously in community, and what I know is still a part of the clinical therapeutic process, is that the connection that is made between therapist and client is extremely important, very valuable in facilitating healing and growth. And like you're just not going to grow if you don't trust your therapist.
Right.
And so like, this is another thing why I think it's really fucking important that, gosh, how to say this, that at least your facilitators, that they will dose with people. Like because I've seen this as well. Someone takes mushrooms, or a group of people take mushrooms, and all of a sudden one or more people start to see the true nature of those who are around them, right? You and I know it. I think we referred to it on one of these past episodes. Like, we've worked with facilitators who refused to dose with the people they're supporting. They refused,
or just anybody.
They refused to dose with other facilitators, and admittedly said because they don't want people to see what might come out of them. Do not go into space with somebody like that. One of the reasons that I take mushrooms with people is so that they can just see me. Here I am, right? All of my faults, all of my, good stuff. Because that trust is imperative in facilitating healing.
Yeah. And, and not to say that you make it all about you. And just to clarify, I can see how somebody would see it that way. But just like in I think pretty sure in most schools of training with therapists and coaches, wellness coaches, there's this balance of rapport building where, you seize opportune moments to be vulnerable as well with the person you're working with, so that they can relax a little bit knowing they're with a human being like them who gets it. And it is a balance for sure. It requires practice and experience and knowing like, okay, now I'm making this too much about myself. We've all well, not all of us, but a lot of us have been to a therapist that does make it all about them. And you're like, hold on, am I here for me or you? But yeah, knowing that balance of willing to be vulnerable is so important. I mean, I apparently really have a lot of experience working out with personal trainers because I always refer to personal training and working out when I'm trying to talk about mushrooms. But like, if you imagine going to a personal trainer who says they don't work out, you'd be like, well, I'm not hiring you. Like, why would I do that? You don't know what you're talking about. Two, if you have much experience going to a personal trainer, I've got a lot of experience with that. My best personal trainers, hands down, are the ones that work out with me. Yeah. That doesn't mean they're doing every single thing with me because they got to take care of themselves too. It's, again, a balance, but being willing to meet me in the middle to the point where I feel them with me, and it builds this not only level of trust and rapport, but it they're acting as actual energy movers. They're setting an example for me that I can model to a point, just like builds my energy, helps me feel like I'm in it with somebody. I'm not alone. So I see it as like very similar.
No, it is. It's just that, the weights that we're lifting are invisible in mushroom space. I remember one time it was coming to me that I dosed with this group, and, there is, whenever you dose within a group or an individuals, whatever, like there is I often call it a flavor or a feel, like there's a vibe, like the ceremony has almost a personality, almost a persona. And sometimes it's light and playful, sometimes it's heavy, sometimes it's in between, but there tends to be like the energetic makeup of the group establishes this kind of overall feeling. The day itself, where it is maybe in cosmology or just simply as the weather and how that influences our mood and that kind of stuff, has a significant impact on the experience and really flavors it or colors it. And I was remembering this one very often, like it's a very challenging group experience, and I'm just like gritting my teeth and smiling through it because like this is fucking hard, and we're gonna get through this, but I'm just gonna just smile through it. And I remember one instance where I was standing on this porch and there's some people around me, and I was just like, doing the inner smile practice while the trip is happening, and like it's such a heavy, difficult day, and this person said something like, must be nice to feel good or something like that. And I was just like, I may look like I feel good, but this is some very hard stuff. This is very hard, and I'm just smiling through it. And I could see when I said that they were like, he does, not only does he get it, he feels where we're at, but he's providing an example of how to get through it. You don't have to just succumb to it and just be like, we can work with it. So there's just so many. Then the intuition is just through the roof, after you learn to hone this, where you can just be guided by the medicine, the experience to somewhere. It's very often, this is the kind of more intangible stuff. It's harder for people to understand, but you see in the mushroom space, particularly in the big groups, that individual placement, just where you are physically, can play a significant role in this kind of energy movement or balancing out of the equation. And I'm not a very intuitive person. Well, I haven't been historically. I'm getting more so because of all the mushrooms and all the practice with intuition. But it's been crucial for me to tune into that intuition to dose alongside people. But again, like, it's just really important to reiterate that this is not something that you just jump into. It's something you really want to slowly practice. There is a very justifiable reasoning behind the shamanic practices of a, decade-long apprenticeship. And again, let's go back to this, great respect that we have for the shamans and for the indigenous practices, except for when it doesn't fit into what we want out of things. Like we want to be psychedelic professionals after a 6-week online course, and this is just not how it works. It's just not how it works.
Right. That's that interesting quick fix mentality. Let's get this done, get in, get out, impersonal, lack of, vulnerability, the lack of seeing the value of vulnerability and experience.
I promise you where this is going to go. And I'm not trying to say this in an arrogant way. But as psychedelic access opens up and more people are working with these medicines, these sacraments, we're going to really understand that this is a communal experience, that this is not best applied in a sterile clinic or office, that this is something that maximum benefit is realized in working in a collective over a longer period of time, particularly with if you don't ascribe to spiritual, then metaphysical focus. The majority of what's happening in the mushroom space is not neurological. The majority of what's happening in mushroom space is energetic, transpersonal, higher dimensional. And it's just going to take us time to really understand that deeply as a collective.
Sure. We're clearly going through a revolution in spirituality, with all of the religious trauma that there is, and religious institutions that are void of spiritual connection and community, and people coming out of those institutions feeling actually having been traumatized, abused, and kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, or just trying to make sense of what is this that I'm in right now, in this confusion between what these institutions have told them and trying to find like the real, what's real, within all of that. And I think what comes with that is this leaning towards, initially at least, a more safe approach, like like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and leaning towards I'm only going to believe what I can see, with my physical eyes, because I've been burned, and I see the holes in all of what I've been told around spirituality and religion. So I can totally see how we've gotten to be where we're at right now in this, scientism, going from religion institution to scientism, and just us working through all of that.
Well, if the third leading cause of death in the United States is medical malpractice, or medical, not necessarily malpractice, but mistakes, right? That's the third leading cause of death in the United States, is doctor fuck up.
Yeah.
So we're also going to come back to center on that as well, to not completely trust. We can't completely trust these institutions that proclaim to have spiritual authority, and we cannot completely trust these institutions that claim to have physical authority, which is really what our ministership is all about, is trusting your own inner authority.
Mm-hmm.
That's where what the mushroom space is so much about. Low level stuff, whatever, you're clearing out the psychological baggage or dusting out the cobwebs. But as you do that and you open up more space, higher awareness, you become more aware of your expanded self. We are not our bodies. A fraction of who we are, it resides within our physical form. That's a hard concept to come to terms with. But in these spaces, you can start to experience that.
Yeah.
And so becoming
and
your
if
own
you're
authority.
really into science, science is like starting to
as
admit
we finally,
that.
admit or explore, because we don't, it's like, I don't know that we know.
Be able to develop tools that can measure so that we can see that with our physical eyes, with a tool that we develop, it's kind of interesting. Like, it just kind of hit me, like with the principle of polarity, like that, hot and cold are just, it's the form on the same spectrum, or on a spectrum, same form, different points on the spectrum. And like this, what we're talking about, this idea of like going from being religious to like only trusting science is the same form, different points on the spectrum, because it's the difference between trusting what's external to you, what someone else tells you is true, versus what you're saying, like finding your inner guidance, trusting your own communication with what's here, what's real. So really, really interesting adventure.
Yeah. So what about you, when you've dosed with people, what's been your experience? As I don't know that I recall directly any like retreats or anything where you were a dosing facilitator, but you've certainly had ceremonies that you've dosed alongside with everybody. How do you kind of compare the two?
Well, there are benefits to both, being in the mushroom space, not being in the mushroom space. Like what we mentioned earlier, kind of depends on the role that you've agreed to. Like, if, like, for instance, I think I mentioned that on Saturday, I felt like if I would have been in the mushroom space, I clearly was thinking to myself, there are communications that I'm getting. There are messages that I'm getting, intuitions that I'm picking up on that I want to communicate, but the language that I can speak right now is not the same. Like, it's not the same. And it's hard to understand if you haven't had that experience of a deep dive or heroic dose, whatever you want to term it, experience, like 3-5 grams, whatever. It feels like you are speaking another language. You're in another realm. You're in another culture and another place. And the language is not English or whatever language you speak here in this realm. So I wanted to communicate things, but I knew that if I tried, that it would most likely be completely misunderstood. And like you said earlier, when you're dosing, you want people who aren't eating mushrooms far away from you. And that is my experience as well, with the exception of people that have enough experience in the mushroom space to know when to keep their mouth shut. And that's how I felt. I wanted to communicate, but I also had the message, don't try with your mouth, because it's just not going to be understood. And I even tried to say some things. And one time you said, what? And I was like, yep. Nope, stop.
Yeah. Good job.
Yeah.
Dude, there is nothing more awkward. I have like in the retreat settings, particularly with therapists, come up on a therapist who is trying to like therapize someone while they're tripping.
It's the worst.
It's like, fucking shut up. Can you stop. I appreciate your effort and your training. This is not where that belongs. Please stop. They have no idea. Like I'm seeing the person just more and more confused by this therapist or whoever trying to.
Yeah, because it's like English. I mean, it's just like you think, like, yeah, seeing a therapist go, tell me what you're feeling right now. Let's talk more about that. And the person in the mushroom space hears want, want, and it's like, what the fuck? What are you doing? Yeah. So yeah, but my experience, alternatively looking at my experiences where I'm in the mushroom space with someone who's also in the mushroom space, the communication comes in a language that you can't put to words here, right now. And so where I know I'm being understood.
It's a vibration.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a time and a place for being in different places in the spectrum of the mushroom space. But both can be so valuable. I was able to identify very quickly, like with the person, the minister we were holding space for on Saturday. Like I was watching the sun. I was watching her face. I was watching the sun moving, and I was like seeing her heating up and knowing she's not going to get up unless I encourage her to get up. And I was able to like pretty readily like go find some yoga mats for her to lay on the ground with. And knowing me, if I had eaten 3 to 5 grams or more, I wouldn't have noticed that. And not to say like you probably would have, and you did. You were noticing the sun on her face. Yeah. But like knowing where you're at.
How did you notice how I did that?
Yeah.
How'd you like that? Because that's.
How'd you like that?
I'm not saying. Well, I'm saying like those are the things that it's hard to train. Right. Like,
that was great
because you don't want to. You're not trying. I'm not trying to move somebody. I don't want to say, "Hey, we need to move you." Like I'm always trying to like just like provide the nudge that the individual is going to, because it's all about learning to take care of ourselves. Yes, we need support from other people, but I'm always trying to empower people in that space. And so like, I did think that I was like, and it wasn't even me. It's just like, I don't know. There's some enormous satisfaction that I get out of being able to really efficiently use language, just like a word or two, like I that's something I've been practicing deeply for years within this space, because there is the ability, excuse me, to poignantly transmit information that can open up the vision, that can provide immediate insight, revelation to the individuals. And there's also, the ability to kind of like initiate.
Well, how you did it, I mean, I would say it in the terms of you were communicating as it was a low pressure hot tip. Like, hey, the sun's getting awful hot on your face there, like, but not like just like that, but I mean, that's what you said, but the energy, enough. Right. It sounded a lot better. Okay. But, and, she immediately was like, oh, okay. Yeah. And, kind of wrestled around. but as opposed to like someone who's not very experienced of knowing how maybe vulnerable that space feels, could have said something like, you need to move.
Or we need to move you, or I want to move you. Or
And then it feels more jarring and like, oh God, this person's very sensitive. And so, yeah, that was great. And it was communicated, yes, in a way where I heard, knowing she heard, you are there with her. You're in that realm with her, as opposed to an outsider giving an insider advice.
Yeah, it's just that kind of soft, like, here's some information.
Take it or leave it.
You're a grown person.
Yeah.
I want to leave you. Because there's also times when you see people try to move somebody or intervene, and the individual flat out doesn't want it.
Right.
So like I'm always erring on the side of caution. Again, another benefit of being in the mushroom space is you're hypersensitive to sound, to words, to movement, and you just can be more aware of the ability to subtly influence situations.
And that's like, I am so glad, like in this example, that you said that, because I was standing there trying to find
You're trying to figure out
the
what
words.
to do. Yeah.
I'm like, oh God, I don't want to sound like an asshole. Like,
I saw you sitting there looking at her like, what do I do?
Like, what's the point where like, how do I, because I'd already kind of like dropped some hints to her, and she wasn't like grabbing them, but the way that you delivered that was just,
I'm just saying, that's like very skillful.
It's very helpful. I was like, all right, thank you.
I just relish so much. It's like when you become really skillful. It's like the Ho Dao De Ching where he says, like, where it's talking about the greatest butcher never makes a cut, right? It's like, and I was like, 5 grams in it, doing my whole thing, circling the lawn, and like had all this stuff going. So I don't know. I said going in because it's been a long time since I've facilitated for a session like that, questioned what going in if I still had it in me, and I guess I'm just giving myself a little pat on the back.
Yeah.
Good job, Eric.
Well deserved. Good job.
It's a wonderful, wonderful workspace, and I feel so enormously privileged to be able to spend so much time working in this very sacred space. So, and I was really, really grateful to have you there with me. It's been a long time on that too.
Yeah, that felt awesome. I really felt, so like, oh, wow, this is what I get to do right now. Oh God, I feel, my heart just feels so full.
And it was
so
the first
fortunate.
time I've done a session in years that was completely detached from money. I'm beyond excited about the developments that we're seeing with Sanctuary and this community support, peer support model where money does not have to be tied to service. Love it, love it, love it. This is the future.
Yeah, it'll be more and more that way, more and more accessible, and more and more accessible as we grow and can get funding through other means.
Anybody out there that wants to participate in funding Sanctuary, we certainly could use some money because we have some big ideas and how we can be of incredible service to this movement, to our family, our human family, and our communities at large. Some really exciting stuff coming up that we're going to be announcing pretty soon. Multiple locations and new programs and offerings, and really, really excited. We're bringing a lot of healing into this world. So this is a huge conversation. I could go on and on. There's so many stories and experiences that we could relate, and maybe there will be time for that. But right now we got to run to a meeting. Sorry, y'all. We know we've been a little bit behind on the podcasts. We're doing what we can. Got a lot of stuff going on. We love doing these podcasts, and we also love not living a life of stress, so we're not stressing ourselves out about.
I think we've been doing great considering all we've had going on. But I'm really curious if you've made it this far to the end. What if you listening have any experience on this topic? Please share your experiences with us when it comes to dosing with people. Would love to hear.
Love to hear that.
Love to hear more.
We also got a couple episodes coming up that are based on listener questions. So if you have any questions or thoughts around the psychedelic space,
Email
please.
us at psilocybinsays@gmail.com.